So welcome to the first episode of our interviews. There's been a lot of interest and talk lately about home flippers and the profits that they generate, which is causing a lot of boomers and seniors to investigate that as a possible solution for increasing their income. So we decided to get into that. Now, there's a lot of weekly seminars that you can go to, which are real rah-rah sessions, and they tell you everything that you need to know about all the good things about flipping homes and how you can make millions of dollars. What we decided to do was take another look at it and get down to the nitty-gritty. So in doing that, we went out and found an expert in the field. Now, a lot of home flippers decide that they really don't want to get involved in the actual details of going out and interviewing a seller and trying to negotiate the house and putting that house under contract. So many of them choose what they cleverly call a buyer. And we've got one of the best buyers in the country right now. His name is Joseph Smith. He has worked for as many as 5 flippers at a time buying homes. And we're going to talk to him about the nuts and bolts of this industry. So with that in mind, hey Joseph, how are you?
I'm doing well, thanks Dan.
Good, good. So do me a favor and just kind of give us a little bit of a background in what you've done in buying and flipping homes in the past.
Okay, well, over the past 21 or about the past 12 months, I purchased, well, I'd say put under contract because it's not my money that I'm purchasing the home with, but I put it under contract, 21 homes at an average of about 70% of their retail value, less what it would cost to fix them up and get to that retail value, which we call their estimated cost of rehab.
So when you say that you go out and you bought 21 homes at 70% of the retail value, what is retail value? Is that that's known as an AVR or ARV?
Yeah, we call that an after repaired value or after rehabbed value. What we do is we go into a market, we determine the value of the home based on the comparable homes in the area, based on the same year, property size, and square footage, and bedrooms and baths. We look at what it would take to bring that home back up to a fully rehabbed value to get to that number. For example, I looked at a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that's 2,000 square feet that recently sold for $400,000 in San Diego. And we're talking with somebody who, same size house, probably the same plan, probably the same builder back in 1970s era, and their house needs $40,000 or $50,000 in order to get to that $400,000 number. So when I say 70% less rehab, it is 70% less that $40,000 or $50,000 that it's going to take to get to 400. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah, sure. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but let's talk about how you find these prospects. How do you get these people who have these homes that are less than market worthy and you can buy at a discount?
Well, the franchise owners spend a lot of money with their respected franchise groups in developing these leads. They do primarily direct mail campaigns. They target people who probably have a lot of debt, who have a good loan to value rate, so that they have the equity in the home, and they pick homes between a median range of value. I'm not exactly sure how they do it, but they spend a lot of money doing it. They buy bus backs, they buy benches, they buy, and in some markets they'll even buy TV spots. They're doing that a lot more now. They will do billboard campaigns. So all of those together funnel these leads into a system that eventually makes my phone ring.
Okay, so basically what you're telling me is that you actually were working for a group of people who were a part of a national franchise, correct? As opposed to individuals going out and doing their own thing. And in this franchising group, they had some kind of marketing provision, lead generation provision, if you will, that they dropped direct mail, they put things on the back of buses, maybe did billboards and things like that, to actually drive a phone call to you. Is that right?
Right.
Okay. Is that normal, or is that, I mean, is that how the majority of people do it, or is that unusual?
I don't think the majority of people can do it just because the overwhelming cost. I mean, the cost per lead was for a good appointment was almost $1,000, and you figure that over many franchises is exorbitant.
So just getting that phone call, because of all the advertising that's involved, was $1,000, correct?
No, not getting just the phone call. Just the phone call itself was probably $400 or $500. But
Okay. Now, you and I talked a little bit about this prior to this phone call, and you mentioned that in addition to those types of leads that are being generated by this franchising company, they were also expected to generate about 50% of their leads on their own. Is that right?
right. The individual franchises were expected to go out and generate their own leads. They called them, I don't know what they called them, but they would do it by going out
they call them
and
hard,
finding homes that they thought were probably not in the best shape, which I always thought maybe kind of was insulting if you knock on somebody's door and think, hey, maybe you'd like me to fix up your home and or take a discount on the sale price. So they were expected to do it by knocking on doors, having relationships with realtors, brokers, and other investors. A lot of times investors will buy from other investors.
Okay. So, but basically what you're saying is that their homegrown leads basically were them running around the neighborhoods, seeing homes that look like they needed repair, maybe knocking on the door and saying, hey, would you like to sell your house to me at a discount, right?
Yeah, for example, when I would go on an appointment, for some franchisees, I was required to go around to about 10 or 15 houses and hang door hangers on homes that I thought might be candidates for this process.
Okay. So I'm getting the indication that generating these leads is really pretty tough and can be actually pretty expensive.
It can be very expensive, and if you don't do it right, you can not have the phone ring at all.
So in your case, you're working primarily in California. On average, what was the cost of an actual sale? If you took $400 or $500 per lead, and what was your close rate?
Well, that depended on the market, really. I primarily worked in the San Bernardino and Riverside County markets, and I did some in San Diego and Orange County. Now, the more expensive the home, the more expensive the cost per deal was, really. So if I'm in San Bernardino and Riverside, you can pretty much count on a $5,000 or $6,000 per deal transaction as far as cost of acquisition. But if you were in San Diego and Orange County, when the houses are twice the price that they are in Riverside and Orange County, you can pretty much expect twice the cost of acquisition of $12,000 to $15,000.
Okay, so right off the bat, you've got a cost somewhere between $5,000 to $15,000 just to acquire a single customer, correct?
That's not even counting all the other costs involved with franchise fees, paying me, and closing on the deal if that's the route they chose to go. Okay,
the reason why I really am kind of trying to hone in on this is because when you see these rah-rah sessions on the weekends, it makes it look like they buy the house for $300,000, they sell it for $500,000, and they pocket $200,000, and it's far from that, correct?
Right, and a lot of the franchisees I work for, they hire me initially because they're just coming into the business. They don't know what they're doing. They had just signed up, and
Right.
So the smart thing to do was to hire somebody that had done it a couple times.
Okay. All right. So again, we're gonna kind of get to the outline of the anatomy of a transaction in a minute. But take me through the process of once you get that lead, how do you actually make that appointment? What do you do to get that person to allow you to come out and look at his house and then give him an offer that you know is going to be lower than he's expecting?
Well, from the start, when the phone rings, I had someone on my team whose job was just to answer the phones, and they read from a script provided by the franchisee that basically said that we're discount buyers, that we don't pay full retail, but that we can offer him cash now, and pretty much anybody with a heartbeat, we would try to go out and see. So we had a pretty good success rate. Once we got out to the home, you'd sit with the homeowner for an hour or so and just trying to figure out why they called you. because there's some reason why they would take a discounted rate instead of going with a realtor, renting out the property or waiting to sell it for full price and fixing it up themselves. Nobody wants to lose money. So there's a reason why they called us, and we try to figure that out. And then we would walk them through the property, and we'd walk it and figure out what it would cost to, if their roof was leaking, if their kitchen needed to be rehabbed in order to get to that ARV number we were talking about. If I had to show them pictures of the house down the street and why it sold for $400,000, I needed to show them why. Look at this kitchen and look at your kitchen, right? This is what we'd have to do in order to get that number. And then we would tell them, well, this is how you could do it yourself, or here's the number that we could get to you. And it was often shocking to them. When you're sitting across from them on the couch and we say their house needs $75,000 in rehab costs in order to get to the number that they already thought their house was worth, it's a bit of a shock. And a lot of times they don't take it well. So it can be a little tender at times.
So how would you make that presentation? Without just literally getting thrown out of the house?
Well, again, it comes with that first hour where you're kind of sitting there building rapport with the customer, talking to them about why they're selling it with us, and listing their options and being honest with them. Hey, you could sell this house with a realtor now, probably for a lot less. You could sell it to me. You could spend the money and rehab it and try to get the max value out of it. And oh, by the way, why are you trying to sell it? A lot of times it was an emergency situation. They were leaving town. They needed the cash for one reason or another. This wasn't a situation that every homeowner's ideally going to be in. This was some kind of need that they had to get that cash now. And so you're sitting there talking with them for an hour or so, and trying to build that rapport and that relationship with them, so that when you do drop that bottom line price on them, which is a lot of times half of what they were thinking, then you've hopefully built up enough rapport not to get thrown out of the house.
Okay, so I'm getting the sense that there's really a lot of sales in this presentation. It's a lot more than just going in, walking through the house, determining that it needs $30,000 worth of work, that the normal house in that area would sell for $330,000 if the work was already done. So you've got to offer them $30,000 less for the repairs, but then in addition to that, you've got to make a profit, so you're going to offer them even less. So it's not like you're going to say, well, there's $30,000 in repair needed, so I'm going to give you $300,000. At some point, you're going to offer them somewhere closer to about $250,000, which again we'll get into. But
right.
And at that point, how many, on average, how many people accept your offer? In other words, how many of those appointments do you go through before you finally get someone who says, yes, I'll go ahead and sign the bottom line with you?
Well, I covered a large area of territory, so a lot of times I'd spend 20 appointments without getting anybody to sign a contract. But on average, of the 200 and something appointments I had gone on, I signed up 1 in 12 appointments.
Okay.
Took me a dozen people to get one deal.
Okay. So you went out and sat through this process essentially 12 times to get one deal.
Right, and that really was better than the company average. If you talk to a lot of people, they went through 100 appointments before they got one.
Really?
I know a guy that went through 50 appointments before he got one. I was fortunate.
Or you're a good salesman.
Or that.
Yeah. So I think the reason why I really want to emphasize this point is that this is one of the things that they never talk about at these seminars. They just say, oh, just go find the houses and either buy them yourself and flip them, or turn them over to a wholesaler, which we'll also talk about. But they never talk about what it really takes to actually do one of these transactions. And you've got to be willing, if you're good at it, to be able to set through 12 of these calls before you finally get one. And if you're not good at it, it could take you a lot more than that. And
right.
if it is taking you a lot more than that, then your cost of each transaction is just increasing like crazy. Isn't that right?
Right. It's far beyond just coming up to the house and saying, oh, look, that house right there sold for $400,000. Here's what I think your rehab is going to be. Here's our offer.
Yeah. Can you take us through the cost, the outline of a typical fix and flip transaction? You've got some house that's I don't know, pick one that you've worked with.
Right, I wrote down an example here. I had a property in Riverside not too long ago. I purchased it for $260,000. It was easy to estimate the value because it was in a recent tract development. The property wasn't too old. It was built in the 1990s, so a lot of them were identical. I mean, you could see 10 or 12 with the exact same houses just around the corner within the same area. And that was always important in determining value, because not only did you have value change within a city, obviously, but you could have a change in value from across the street. So it was really difficult to make sure that you were right on your numbers, because if you were wrong on your numbers and you wrote an offer, you were locked into that offer pretty much. And so you could lose money on a transaction if you didn't have the right training in the MLS system, in home repair, and all the other costs that go into it, because there's a lot more costs, and I'll go over that, than just the purchase price and the rehab cost. So again, I had a property I put under contract for $260,000. The value I had was about $375,000, which turned out to be pretty close. This particular franchisee wanted to actually fix and flip the house, which means he actually had to close on the property, and those initial closing costs were $9,000. The cost of repair was $25,000, and as I learned, the rehab costs, you always want to be a little heavy on your rehab costs, because you can go into a property and not fully estimate them pretty carefully. You can pull back the carpet and find that there's now stains on the hardwood that you have to replace. You can find a lot of hidden repairs that you didn't necessarily see right away. Anyhow, these particular closing costs were $25,000, and those are pretty minor. 3 months later, the house sold for $350,000. So I was a little high on $375,000, but I think the franchise wanted to get it out quicker. I think if you hold the property longer, you can get the higher number, but that relates into more holding costs. The holding costs totaled about $2,000 worth of HOA fees and water and insurance and things like that. The second closing cost, including the realtor, was much higher at about $16,000. I was paid $5,000.
The second closing cost for when they actually sold the house to the eventual buyer who was going to actually live in the house, correct?
Right.
So in your case, you have closing costs when you buy it, and you also have closing costs when you're selling it again.
Right.
Okay.
And then this franchise that I worked for, they required a fee on the transaction, and their portion of that was $7,500. So for a $260,000 purchase, it actually cost them about $335,000. So they only netted about $20,000.
$20,000 on how long was the project? I mean, from the time that you actually
it was 3 months.
Put it under contract to the time that you resold it.
Oh, actually, there was time before when I put it under contract before the initial owner moved out. So it took about 5 months from when I put it under contract till they closed the final escrow.
That's a pretty low return on investment for that kind of risk, don't you think?
I do. But there are other ways that the franchisee can limit his risk in this. One is wholesaling a property. So on a $260,000 purchase, there are lots of investors out there that will pick that property up for about 75% of its value. So if the franchise was new or pressed for cash, they could pretty quickly assign that contract without it even closing yet to about $275,000, I'd guess. So they could make a quick $10,000 or $15,000. That's not including the franchise fee, because they still charge you a franchise on wholesaling, and they would still have to pay me. So they could take a lot less money quicker on that first transaction if they'd like to, or they could gamble for the bigger money by doing the rehab themselves and double closing.
Okay, so let's kind of review that a little bit. This wholesaling or assignment, what capital is involved to do that? You've got the same property, you're making the exact same offer, you're putting up a certain amount of capital, and at that point, is that the total amount of capital that's involved in the transaction for the franchisee?
Well, no, there's when you open escrow on the initial transaction, so when I put a home under contract that we know the franchise is going to assign, they have to put up an earnest money deposit.
Yeah.
So that when we open escrow, which is the very next day, that franchisee has to put up $2,000 or $5,000 to open that escrow, and that money is held until the escrow closes, when the new investor comes in and basically buys the contract for whatever they had agreed to, which is somewhere between 75 and sometimes as high as 80% of the value of the home, depending on how much that new investor wants the property.
Okay. But the earnest money deposit is really part of their actual deposit to put the house under contract. I think what I'm getting at is that it sounds to me like there's a huge difference between the risk involved with just simply going out, finding a property, putting it under contract, and then immediately assigning it to a wholesaler. Or, on the other hand, actually closing it, having to come up with the money to actually close it, coming up with the money to actually repair it, coming up with the money to actually hold on to it during the time that you're doing that, and then placing it back on the market.
Mm-hmm.
Am I describing that properly?
Right, and that's not the only capital required, because in addition to that, in the background, you're still funding your next marketing campaigns, and you're still going. And a lot of times, that's not the only property that you have under contract. So even if you're taking the less risky way of assignment, and you're only putting up $2,000 to $5,000 per deal, you probably have 2 or 3 deals in progress, in addition to continuing your business. Hope I answered that correctly.
Well, I understand what you're saying. So let's assume that someone is interested in getting into this business and they want to start out with as little risk as possible. So that means that they just want to go find and put houses under contract to be assigned to a wholesaler. What do you believe would be the minimum amount of capital that someone would need to actually successfully get into this business and get to a point where they're actually making money before they run out of money? Because they don't have enough to actually go buy the next house, or they don't have the money to support their marketing campaign.
Right, and you reminded me of something as well. In addition to the assignment fee that you would give to an investor, you also have to figure out that $6,000 to $15,000 cost of acquisition is still included in that too.
Right.
So a quick $15,000 again, after you pay me and you pay the franchise fee, and you're still got that cost of acquisition. That's not just new money. So
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I've seen hundreds of franchises in this business, and a lot of them are undercapitalized because, for one, they think that they're going to buy a house right away, and it's quite possible that you don't buy one for a whole year. So you have to be able to capitalize your business for a year, and you have to be able to live with no income, on the private side for up to a year. Not to mention these funding if you're going to rehab a property, or if you're going to have several houses under contract. All of those, take more and more capital. So I wouldn't do it for less than $100,000, $150,000 in liquid cash available.
Yeah. So you think that at least $100,000 to $150,000 in capital is necessary to assure, or pretty much assure, that you're not going to run out of money before you actually start to create transactions that are going to start returning your investment.
Right. If you do it right, they'll start returning investment.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we've talked about basically a lead format where you're generating leads. What about the ideas of going to the auctions, the bank auctions and foreclosures and things like that? Is that real, or is that just hype that we hear?
Well, it's real, but you're competing with everybody else out there. All those investors that you could assign to, or you end up selling to on an assignment or even a rehab, those are all the guys that are standing at the courthouse steps willing to pay 90% for that house. So this business model can't survive on a 90% purchase. Never will, because with both transaction costs and everything. So we have to buy it 65 to 70%, 75 at the top end.
Less repairs.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. And that's not going to happen on a foreclosure. No bank will agree to that. And it doesn't happen on a probate sales and everywhere else that people are trying to get leads from.
So these advertisements of companies that are telling you buy our list of foreclosures and it'll make you rich, that's a pump and dump. That's a hype scheme.
Well, the list of foreclosures isn't a secret. Anybody
Yeah.
could buy the list. So
Yeah.
you're competing with everybody else who has mailed that person or phoned that person, and you're probably not the highest offer. And especially in our case, a lot of times, if I was competing against another company or an individual investor who didn't have the same overhead that my franchise had, I'd lose every time. Because that franchisee had to account for me, their franchise fees, and everything else included.
I kind of zero in on this because I think this is really one of the most important aspects of the hype that surrounds this business. Everybody thinks that they can go get a foreclosure, or they can just talk to their local bank and the bank's going to sell it to them at a discount. They think that they can drive up and down the street and see some house that is in need of repair and just knock on the door, and that person says, "Gee, I'm really glad that you stopped by today because I was waiting for someone to come take my house at a discount from me."
Right.
Essentially,
Right.
you're saying that that's not really realistic.
That's not reality
Yeah,
at all.
that it's really a lot of hard work, and there's a lot of money that goes along with that hard work to actually locate those individuals who might be prospects. And in order to do that, you're taking a pretty big risk. I mean,
You are, right?
it's not like
You're
opening
competing
up
with
a
a lot
sandwich
of
shop where
people.
you put up a sign, you buy some inventory, you start making some sandwiches, and people come in the door immediately and start giving you money. In this case, it could be months and months, maybe even a year, before you get any kind of return. Is that right?
That's right. And all the while, you're capitalizing the next month of leads that are coming in that are vital to your business.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, good. Well, that's depressing news. I think
I,
I think in this case, this is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the answers that tell people the reality behind each one of these types of opportunities. And if someone really has the ability and the temperament to actually go out and find these properties and talk with the people and deal with the people, and has the money to kind of back them up as they're doing it, could be a pretty good opportunity. But if they don't have all of those things in place, it's probably not the right opportunity for them. Would you agree with that?
if they have the right temperament and the money and the skill, they're probably already doing it.
Yeah.
So it can be done if you have the time and the patience and the skill of selling, and you have the financial means to sit back for a while and learn and buy enough leads to do it. But it takes the right amount of money and temperament, I suppose.
Okay. So one last question before we wrap this up. Tell me what you feel are the pros of this industry or this business model, and what are the cons?
Well, when the pros were, I got a lot of windshield time. I wasn't stuck in an office.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. The franchisee might have been a little different, but the pros is I would talk to a lot of franchisees who liked seeing a project come together. They liked helping people. So, for example, I worked for a franchisee that he bought a house from a woman who was in a pretty bad situation in her marriage, needed to leave the house, and we were able to get her the money that she needed quickly and get her out of that particular situation. We were able to fix up the property and make a little bit of money. But the cons are it's a long process. It takes you have to find the right deals. They're not just sitting out there waiting for you, and it takes a lot of money to find those deals. And it takes some patience. And it takes a skill in, or at least the relationships in multiple fields of construction, of escrow, of lead generation, of selling. you have to have a broad network in order to make it successful.
Yeah, I got it. Okay. Well, Joe, I really appreciate your time, and I wish you a lot of luck out there. And I think we'll probably get back in touch with you in a few months and see how things are going. So thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dan.